Thank you all for being here. This is the monthly meeting of the Summit Wasatch Unit. It's part of the Salt Lake League. And we are really happy to have Tom Moyer with us. He is a league member and he's from Park City. And one of his many titles is the Utah State Coordinator for Citizens Climate Lobby. And you are the person we need today to get us going on the state legislature and understand what's happening in the national news. My golly, so much is happening. I'm very grateful for everything that's happening right now, actually. Anyway, I've asked Tom to talk about both federal things that are happening and the goals of the Citizen Climate Lobby, which overlap clearly, as one would expect, from the League of Women Voters positions. So our first half an hour, Tom, you'll have. Second half an hour, we'll do question and answers. You can put questions in the chat or just wait till then and raise your hand, but we should have a good hour. Tom, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the introduction. So Jill asked me to spend half the time talking about the federal landscape and half the time talking about the state legislature. Federally, we have what I think right now is the most exciting opportunity on climate legislation since I've been involved in this topic, which is, pretty much the most exciting opportunity since 2008. The last time there was a serious run at climate legislation in Congress. In a 50-50 Senate, the Senate obviously is driving the bus. The democratically controlled House can pass what it wants to. It's a question of what can we get past the Senate or what can we get through executive action. In general, we can't get that much through executive action. We can get less than we could have gotten in the Obama administration. And the reason for that is the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. So the Obama administration did three, other than joining the Paris Agreement, did three main things by executive action. And that was the Clean Power Plan, which was emissions reductions for the electricity sector. It was vehicle mileage standards, and it was methane leakage from oil and gas operations. All of those by executive action. The Clean Power Plan never went into effect, but it still helped enormously just by existing. It basically chilled construction of new coal plants at a time when some people might still have considered that to be a viable financial option. Now it's not. Clean Power Plan or no Clean Power Plan, nobody's building any coal plants. It's just a question of when they shut down. Methane leakage will probably still happen by executive action, and vehicle mileage standards will probably still happen by EPA policy. So both of those are on the table. Emissions reduction from power plants would probably get stopped by the Supreme Court, by today's Supreme Court. There's probably no room for anything substantial to happen there. The good news is emissions reduction from electricity generation is happening anyway by market forces. That isn't where the majority of the effort needs to happen right now. It's in all the other sectors. But this Supreme Court has already signaled it's going to be fairly hostile to executive orders. And so the things that are really going to matter really have to come from Congress. And that's where we have a phenomenal opportunity right now, because we basically have climate change elevated as a topic of importance in the Democratic Party and increasingly in pieces of the Republican Party. And we live in a state where one of the Republican votes is likely to come from. So in the Senate, it pretty much takes 60 votes to get anything noteworthy done, unless you go through reconciliation on budget topics, and you get one shot a year at doing that. So if we're talking about a bill that only needs 50 Senate votes, then it's basically in the control of Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski, and Joe Manchin. Whatever they say is what we can pass on climate legislation. If it's a bill that takes 60 votes, then it's going to take a gang. a gang of Republican senators, and Mitt Romney is clearly going to be one of them. Mike Lee is probably not going to be one of them, but Mike Lee is still critically important to everything we do, because if Mike Lee hates something, he's going to bring a lot of people with him in Utah, and it's going to be really hard for Mitt Romney to support something if Mike Lee rallies opposition to it. So we have been trying to lay the groundwork, both for Mitt Romney to support something substantial, and for Mike Lee not to vehemently oppose something substantial. And a lot of what we're doing at the state level is to build support underneath Mitt Romney, so that he actually has the freedom to vote for substantial emissions reductions. That signal that the state legislature sends is far more important to our federal delegation than anything we might do at the state level emissions-wise. So the policy we feel strongest about, that we're working hardest on, and this has never changed, is carbon pricing. It's fee and dividend legislation. And that's been introduced in the last two Congresses, that most recently as HR 763. And that is, it's an aggressive emissions reduction program that puts a fee on carbon emissions, puts a fee on the fuels at their source, and then rebates 100% of the revenue to taxpayers. So the effectiveness of any kind of carbon fee depends on the size of the fee. The higher the fee, the more incentive you're going to impose to reduce emissions. That bill, the fee increases at $10 per ton per year. So for our everyday life, that's the equivalent of about 10 cents a gallon of gasoline. So each year, it goes up by 10 cents a gallon. So after a decade, it's $1 a gallon. After 2 decades, it's $2 a gallon. Gasoline turns out to be not a great example for that, because that's the sector that's hardest to affect by carbon pricing. The sector that's easiest to affect is electricity. Electricity generation will go clean at about $50 a ton, and it'll have a serious effect on coal at about $20 a ton. So electricity is the sector that happens first, followed by heating of buildings, followed by transportation and industry. And it takes something like a $200 a ton price or $2 a gallon of gasoline before you see a serious effect on transportation and industry. But the emissions targets in that legislation are 40% emissions reduction across the economy by 2030 and 90% emissions reduction by 2050. So that's the kind of ambition we need. And there are plenty of other kinds of policies you could imagine that would get us similar ambition. We favor that, a carbon pricing policy, both because it's the most efficient way, it's the lowest cost to the economy, and because it has a substantial chance of being bipartisan. So right now, in the last Congress, we had one Republican co-sponsor on that bill who has now left Congress. That was Francis Rooney of Florida. And we had, at last count, I think 84 Democrats on it. So of all of the carbon pricing bills and all the clean energy standard bills, it is the one with the highest number of co-sponsors. There's significant disagreement in the, sort of between the left and moderate, left and center portions of the Democratic Party on what kind of policy to support, where the Democratic left would prefer a more government-directed approach, and the center would prefer a more market-based approach like carbon pricing. It's worth mentioning that in the last Congress, we actually passed substantial legislation already. The last budget bill, and this was really a surprise. I thought a lot of the work that we had done would just sort of be rolled over into the next Congress. At the very last minute, the budget bill included a bunch of energy legislation, some of which we worked on and some of which was co-sponsored by members of the Utah delegation. So Ben McAdams and John Curtis both were co-sponsors on the BEST Act, which is battery energy storage support. I think nothing else John Curtis was a co-sponsor on the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which did not pass, and we will continue to work on that. That is, its support, it's actually a funding mechanism. There's no funding in the bill, but it's a funding mechanism for farmers to get paid for efforts to sequester carbon in the soil. So that funding would actually come from states and corporations that have voluntarily imposed that on themselves, like California is allowing payments to farmers to count as part of their carbon market. But right now there's no mechanism to account for how much carbon goes in the soil, so no farmers can actually get paid for that. So this seems like sort of a no-brainer for everybody. It's a 100% benefit for Utah. And when this was initially proposed, I said, you know, we're doing something wrong if we can't get the entire Utah delegation on board that bill. So I actually have a call tomorrow with Governor Cox's staff to talk about it, to get their official endorsement. And then the other one that gets rolled over into the next Congress is called the Reclaim Act. And that has, on the surface, nothing at all to do with climate. That is just economic support for coal country. And it's transition assistance and economic diversification. It's focused on Appalachia, but it would have some benefits for Utah as well. The Utah delegation is not as excited by that bill because most of the money goes to Appalachia. It's still a good thing to do. Those people deserve our gratitude and thanks for, you know, the support they've given to the economy through now, and the fact that we no longer really need their product means we have somewhat of an obligation to help them through this transition, and it helps us make climate legislation easier when they aren't such a visible symbol of suffering in the energy transition. It's also a really, really low cost thing to do. The Reclaim Act is $1 billion of funding for economic transition. And it's sponsored by Kentucky legislators. So that's a really easy way to mitigate some of the opposition to more aggressive climate legislation, is actually be helping some of the people most directly affected. And they're already affected. The economic pain they're going through is not going to be any less by us not taking action on climate change. It's already happening. And in the future, we're increasingly going to have to look at the same kind of support for oil and gas centered areas like the Uinta Basin. The transition is hitting the coal industry first, but it's coming. Uinta Basin's suffering as well, but it's because they operate a high cost oil field in a world of flat or decreasing demand for oil, which hopefully that demand continues to decrease. So the next thing is really what Biden can do through executive action. And he's already done a lot, from rejoining the Paris Agreement to stopping the Keystone XL pipeline to stopping the possibility of oil leases in ANWR. So the questions are what else he can do beyond those. There still are significant opportunities. Federal purchasing is probably the biggest one. He has the power to say that all federal purchasing will be electric vehicles, for example, or all federal purchasing will be 100% clean electricity. That's a big stick to move the market. But I hope that we can go beyond that, that executive actions are not the only thing we can do. So let's move to talking about state legislation. I mentioned before that the biggest effect our state legislators can have right now is the permission structure we give to our federal delegation, most notably Mitt Romney and John Curtis, but we really hope to be able to move others as well. Blake Moore, newly taking office in District 1, who's my representative, we've had some great conversations with him already. about climate change. And of course, his primary concern is the Uinta Basin because he represents them as well. And we've pointed him to things like the Gardner Institute's Coal Country Strike Team and what they're doing for Carbon and Emery counties in terms of economic diversification. I don't think Blake Moore is going to support anything really strong like a carbon price, but it's very likely that he's going to jump on board with a lot of the things that John Curtis is doing. And by the way, John Curtis has just been assigned to Energy and Commerce and to a climate subcommittee of that. And that was at his request. He was angling for that assignment. That is the committee from which most climate legislation will come.
Say that committee again. Which committee?
Energy and Commerce.
Okay.
So he really has prioritized climate change, and he has prioritized moving the Republican Party on climate change. He's not joined the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus because he doesn't think it's a very effective caucus. But Energy and Commerce is really where you get to affect climate policy. And so, you know, he's chosen to make this one of his highest priority topics and angle for the committee assignment that enables that. So at the state level, you know, a few years ago, we passed the Economic and Environmental Stewardship Resolution, which was a huge step for signaling openness by the Utah Legislature for considering this. And then the following year, they allocated funding for the Gardner Institute to develop the Utah Roadmap for both air pollution and greenhouse gases. And since then, not a whole lot has happened. Last year, they did take some good steps on electric vehicle infrastructure and transit-oriented development, but they really refused to discuss any further the bulk of the roadmap. And that is now where the efforts lie. So Steve Handy has a really good bill called HCR 5, which is adopting the emissions reductions targets in the roadmap. And that's an 80% reduction of greenhouse gases and a 50% reduction of air pollution emissions by 2050. I have zero expectation that that resolution will pass. I don't think we're there yet on convincing the Utah Legislature. The initial hearing on that in the interim session really did not go well. There was a ton of opposition for rural legislators, and we have work to do. The split right now is much more urban-rural than it is Republican-Democrat. There's plenty of support from urban Republicans, but House and Senate leadership really don't want a big intra-caucus fight. And that's what this sort of thing is. So I don't think that's a resolution that can pass this year, but it's still really important that it's going to be proposed and heard. And it's still really important for us to go speak to our legislators and pull up the support for it, and to start having those conversations with rural legislators. And some of you, like me, might be in Ron Winterton's district. So we're already represented by somebody with primarily rural interests. And that's a great place for us to start. I don't think he's going to be a supporter of that kind of thing, but he might be. And he can also, be part of the outreach to others. So Ray Ward also has it's a bill which is carried over from last year and was never given a hearing last year, to strengthen Utah's renewable portfolio standard. It's a bit of a surprise that we even have one. It's soft, it has no teeth whatsoever. The new bill also has no teeth, but it raises the ambition from 20% to 50%.
What bill is that, Tom?
It's HB 145. So the current standard, and by standard I mean soft goal, is 20% by the year 2025, and this would raise it to 50% by the year 2050. We are easily going to hit the current goal. We will probably also easily hit the new goal, but nobody wants to talk about that yet. That bill will probably also not pass. But again, it's important that this is being introduced by a Republican and pushed in front of the legislature, and that sends an important signal to Mitt Romney and John Curtis. Steve Handy also has a bill. One of the Utah Roadmap's goals was a climate and air quality research center. That does have support. Governor Cox talked about it in his State of the State speech. I would not be at all surprised if we can pass that. It's only a feasibility study. It allocates no money, but it's a first step towards showing support for that. Just saying we want to be, you know, one of the nation's leaders on at least studying this issue. Sort of like the stewardship resolution. That is HB 123. And then Representative Briscoe has a bill that hasn't been introduced yet, so it's not numbered, but that's going to be sort of a green bank. So low interest rate funding for clean energy projects. And that, if we can pass that, that could actually be a really big deal for clean energy development in Utah, because almost everything to do with the financial viability of clean energy projects has to do with interest rates, because they're all initial spending up front and not operating expenses later. So if you can fund those on a low interest rate, all of a sudden they look great financially. And there's one bill that we are opposing, which surprisingly is also being run by Steve Handy. And I have not talked to him about this bill. I know that Josh Kraft from Utah Clean Energy has, but I believe he's just running it at the request of Dominion Energy. And that is a bill to ban, it's a ban on bans, to stop cities like Park City and Salt Lake City from banning gas in new construction, which they have not yet proposed to do, but they might someday want to consider that. There are a bunch of cities in California and Massachusetts who are now banning gas in new construction. And that is probably the next step for a city like Park City that wants to be aggressive with its climate goals. That is probably the next step they're going to have to do to hit the targets they're talking about. They've already contracted for 100% clean electricity, and it takes a long time to change over heating systems. And there's nothing you can do about natural gas heating systems other than replace them. So the single easiest thing you can do is require new buildings to use electric heating systems like heat pumps. And even at that, it's going to be a 30 or 40 year project before you're through the last of the existing heating systems. Electric vehicles, that happens a lot faster, and that's going to happen with some support from the state. Natural gas in homes and buildings is probably going to be the last thing we get rid of. So the sooner we start, the faster we'll get there. Dominion does not want to hear that at all. Dominion wants to sell us expensive renewable natural gas, so gas, biomethane, gas from landfills and methane digesters and agriculture, which is a fine thing to do. It just costs a lot. The electric heating is a lot cheaper and easier and cleaner than that approach. So I would love to see that bill defeated. Park City says they're not that worried about it. Even if it passes, they have other ways that if they decide they want to go this route, that they could basically implement the same thing that doesn't look like an outright ban on gas. So it's symbolic. It's already passed a committee. It'll probably pass the House next. I would love to see us not throw roadblocks in the way of clean energy and electrification. Steve Handy also has another good bill, HB 153, which is a tax credit for battery energy storage. that is targeted at commercial and industrial use rather than residential. I don't know if you all know, Rocky Mountain Power has a good program that just started, which is an incentive for homeowners. You have to have solar, but it's a subsidy. It's up to $6,000 per 10 kilowatt hours of battery storage. So it's roughly half the cost of a home battery. And the condition is they get to use it as part of their load management. They get to drain it and refill it twice a day if they want to. But in return, they pay half the cost of your battery. So that to me is a fantastic deal for homeowners. There's a couple of other bills. Jeff Stenquist is going to come back with his vehicle emissions reduction program. He doesn't like it being called cash for clunkers, but it's a cash for clunkers bill to take dirty cars off the road and replace them with either new gasoline or electric vehicles. And then Dan McKay has a good bill incentivizing telecommuting for state agencies on red air days. So that's wonderful to see as well. It's wonderful to see stuff like that with good bipartisan support.
Whose bill is that? The incentives for telecommuting?
Dan McKay, and that's SB 15. We did also last year, I don't know anything about this right now, but last year we had a bill introduced by Senator Cullimore. It was a resolution supporting federal efforts at carbon pricing. So it's basically endorsing federal carbon pricing legislation. And that went absolutely nowhere. It got killed by Senate leadership, pulled off the agenda at the 11th hour. I don't think he's interested in running it again. But we do have friends in the Young Conservatives for Carbon Dividends group who are trying to find a sponsor for a similar resolution. And if they get one, we will absolutely support that. That's another thing that almost certainly can't pass, but would be a really, really good symbol for our federal legislators. So I think I'll stop there. We're right about half an hour and just see what questions people have.
Okay, there are a couple in the chat already. Carol Strawn asks, what about backup for electric heat when you have a blackout?
It's an excellent question. If you have a home battery, that's your backup, but it's fairly expensive backup. If you don't have that, then you have no heat in a power outage. Most people who have gas furnaces also have no heat in a power outage. It takes electricity to run the controls on your gas furnace. Yeah. That's fairly simple to back up. You can back that up with a small battery. If you actually are supplying the heat electrically, you need a large battery to back it up. But for most homeowners, it doesn't matter because they have no battery. So anytime the power goes out, your heat goes out too.
So that HB 153, the commercial battery, does that have anything to do with homeowners?
It doesn't.
It does not. Okay.
No. So right now, it's the only thing I know of for homeowners is the Rocky Mountain Power Program. And that's limited to the first 1,000 homeowners who sign up. But they expect to extend it in subsequent years to open it up to more people. And I don't know who's funding that.
So explain that a little bit more. And is that all filled up, all 1,000?
No, it just started. It just opened a few weeks ago.
Okay. And say what it does again.
Okay. So that is an incentive for you to, and it's only applicable for homeowners with solar.
Oh, okay.
Because for some reason, the tax laws require that it seems like a dumb constraint. It's just as useful to the utility, whether you have solar or you don't. But the tax laws are written so that you only get the tax credit if you can charge it from a solar array. So that's something at the federal level that probably needs to be fixed. But right now, it's only open to homeowners with solar or who are installing solar. And letting Rocky Mountain Power use your home battery as part of their grid management. So when they have excess generation, they can put it into your battery, and when they need more generation, they can take it out of your battery. So the condition of them paying roughly half the cost is they get to use that battery twice a day.
Okay, that's really interesting.
And I think it's a 4-year commitment. And after that, the battery's yours.
Well, I think some of the people on this call have solar arrays. I know Shirley does.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, another question from Norma Wills. Does Steve Handy's bill, the ban on bans, affect private developers, for example, in Park City, from building all electric complexes, i.e. Apartments?
Yeah, no, right now, any builder can build with any heating source they want, and that would not change. What would change is that Park City would be prevented from requiring electric construction.
Right. But what is Park City's workaround on that?
Oh, they can require, for example, they could pass a clean gas standard saying if you're going to have gas, it has to be renewable gas. And the practical effect of that would be to drive everybody to electric construction because it's better and cheaper than renewable gas. I live in an all-electric house. My house is heated with a heat pump. And there are already practical advantages to the homeowner besides not having any air pollution to an electric house. It's a more controllable, more comfortable house. It is also slightly more expensive to operate. The operating cost is about 20% higher than heating your house with gas if you're paying for the electricity. So right now, Steve Handy's bill is being sold as energy choice. Let's not take the choice away from homeowners and developers. Let's let them choose whatever energy source they want. But it is taking the choice away from Park City to choose to go cleaner, or Salt Lake City, or choose to require it to be cleaner.
Why don't we don't have any more questions in the chat, so why don't you just raise your hand? Carol, unmute, please. Okay.
So I'm just imagining all these homeowners with batteries that Rocky Mountain Power has access to. If that became a big thing, would that cool Rocky Mountain Power's hostility to rooftop solar?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I don't think it would. I think Rocky Mountain Power is always going to be fairly hostile to an electricity generation that they don't own. Rocky Mountain Power has no hostility to solar at all. It's only a question of who owns it. So they get paid when they build stuff. And if you build rooftop solar, they don't get paid for it. They love building solar arrays in southern Utah that they own and get to control the transmission for and sell you the power from.
Another question? Norma.
Hi, Tom.
Hi.
What are the chances of Joel Briscoe's Green Bank thing going through? Because that's the similar concept that Weber State has used to revolutionize their energy use, and it's been so successful. Do you think that really has a chance? Because that would be a big deal, I would think.
Yeah, I think it depends on the fiscal note, which I haven't seen. It depends on how much money it's ultimately going to cost the state budget. If it's a lot, they're going to say no to it. But I love the concept, and I hope that's the sort of thing that can get bipartisan support.
Yeah, because Weber State has actually made money on the deal.
Right.
So, it's a really good model, and helps everybody as far as I'm concerned.
Right. I think this is the kind of thing that could potentially be a huge lever to incentivize projects at really, really low cost to the budget.
Tom, would you explain that bill again?
Yeah, so it's just it's financing. It's just setting interest rates.
Okay.
It's a source of loans at low interest rates to developers who want to do clean energy and energy efficiency projects. So it's going to cost the state something to offer interest rates lower than the market is offering, but it could be that it doesn't cost very much and it unlocks a bunch of projects.
Right. Well, the interest rates are really low right now.
Yes. Yes, that is true. It's a great time to build stuff.
So, but this would lock it in for more than just a couple years.
Right, right. It would both be lower than market rates and presumably last for longer.
Yeah. Okay, more questions? Amy, unmute, please.
Okay. How about the network of charging stations for electric cars? What might be underway in the next few years to improve that, do you think?
I don't know if there's any new legislation coming, but in the last legislative session, the legislature authorized Rocky Mountain Power to build $50 million worth of charging infrastructure and bill the ratepayers for it. Which that takes permission from the legislature. $50 million is a big number. That's a lot of electric vehicle infrastructure, and that's going to really, really advance things in the state. I mean, we're going to be one of the best states in the country for charging stations.
But
we're already sort of in the top 10.
But that's not a done deal?
No, that's a done deal. Yeah, that passed a year ago, and Rocky Mountain Power is getting underway building stuff.
So there's no reason to think that they're not going to go through with it.
No, because that makes them money. They love doing that.
Okay.
And it also increases demand for their product. I mean, that's 100% good for them.
Okay.
I think Utah is going to be really good. Utah is going to be at the forefront on electric vehicles. This is the one clean energy technology we're really going to be doing well in.
Hey, Jill, this is Chris. Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Sure. Yeah.
Tom, you said Rocky Mountain Power is going to bill us for that?
Yeah, they're going to bill ratepayers.
How does that show up? It's just general.
I don't know. It's somehow rolled into the rates they charge for electricity to recover those costs.
Right, so it's not a separate line item on my bill.
Not to my knowledge, yeah.
Okay.
I don't think you pay the electric vehicle infrastructure add-on.
Right.
I think they're just, everything they do has to go through the Public Service Commission, what rates they're allowed to charge, and they're allowed to recover their costs for those expenses.
Right.
So we don't know whether they've started charging us already or not.
Right, and it may just have prevented a lowering of rates, right, that would otherwise have happened. It's just the next argument they get to use in front of the Public Service Commission of like, hey, we were told we got to break even or make a profit on this expense, so you have to let us charge for it, or you have to let us collect enough revenue from our ratepayers.
Right. Athena, did you have a question?
This is Jan Streifel. Can I ask?
Jan, sure.
Do they have a time limit on when they need to spend this 50 billion?
50 million.
50 million, okay.
I think they do. I don't know what it is though. They're motivated to spend it as soon as possible. The sooner they spend it, the sooner they get to collect the profit on it.
Helen, you have a question? I just saw
Yeah,
you. Go
sure.
ahead.
Hi, Tom. So going back to the question about the EV charging infrastructure. So where do we stand currently on tax credits for purchase of electric vehicles? And is that likely to promote restarting, increasing the tax credits, et cetera, just to build demand for electric vehicles that would ultimately be relying on that infrastructure?
So the federal tax credit still exists. And it's phasing out per manufacturer as each manufacturer hits their cap on number of vehicles, which is a bit of a bummer because it punishes the the manufacturers that were early successes.
Mhm.
Makes them now less competitive in the marketplace. I
Mhm.
don't believe there's a state credit
Yeah.
for electric vehicles, and I don't know of any legislation to create one. I think they've decided to put all the money towards infrastructure.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. I mean, I sort of think more is better. I'd love it if we had both,
Mhm.
but if I had to pick one, I think I'd probably pick infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Let lots of people, let people charge quickly wherever they want to charge, and then plenty of people are going to want EVs.
Mhm.
Norma, did you have a question?
Yeah, there's another bill, I can't remember the particulars, but there's another bill to actually raise registration fees. I don't know if it's regulation or usage fees for electric vehicles. So how does that balance with promoting electric vehicles?
I think that already happened. I don't know if there's another one to raise it further. But
I think there is, but I don't.
Okay.
I can look it up, but
Yeah, if there is, I haven't seen it yet. All of this is short term, because I mean the argument is that electric vehicles don't pay gas taxes, which fund the roads.
Right.
So the electric vehicles are getting a free pass on the roads, which in my opinion is good. That's a subsidy for not polluting, and we ought to be doing more of that. But ultimately it doesn't work. As more and more of society shifts to electric vehicles, we do have to charge appropriately for the use of the roads, and that's fine. And they're eventually going to switch to a per mile user fee, and they're already piloting that. It's an option right now for electric vehicles. You can choose that, or you can pay the higher registration fee.
right, I think they passed that last year.
Yeah, but
Or
that's a
into
pilot
effect.
with the intent that eventually all vehicles are built that way.
All
And
elec-
so this whole topic kind of goes away at that point.
So not just electric vehicles, all vehicles.
Right. Right. They would really rather, and I don't mind that in general, that people who drive more pay more for the use of the roads. And we achieve that right now with a gas tax, with sort of an extra disincentive on pollution. But I think eventually we will, gasoline vehicles are going to phase out and electric vehicles are going to phase in. And it's okay to sort of be looking ahead to what the funding structure looks like at that point.
Carol Strong just put a question in. Tom, will you, Climate Action or Citizens Climate Lobby, be sending out action alerts that we should be receiving to contact our legislators?
So Climate Utah is going to do action alerts for the state legislation. Citizens Climate Lobby focuses on federal legislation, and we will definitely, the way to get those is to just put your name in and be a CCL member. And same thing for Climate Utah, but we've chosen to separate out lobbying at the federal level from lobbying at the state level. So you have to sign up separately if you want those. The next federal action, we have lobby days in March, and they're virtual right now, but we have lobby teams that will be meeting with each of those offices. And we try to do a big calling event right before those lobby days to put climate front and center in those offices.
So for Utah, Climate Utah, how do we get those?
So the Climate Utah website, you can just click join and put your name in, and it'll ask you for your House and Senate district, so that we can customize those action alerts if we need to get attention paid to a particular legislator.
Okay, that sounds good. And the League of Women Voters, we have action alerts, not just on energy and climate issues, but on numerous issues. But we will, all members of the League will be getting those.
Jill,
Carol.
we also have the capability of customizing those action alerts. Our membership roster is segmented by districts. House, State House, Senate, and congressional districts. So if we were to actually utilize and implement that, I think it could be a powerful tool. So
That sounds exciting.
Yeah,
That would be the first. We don't do that right now.
we're starting work on it. We have a pilot project.
Okay, good.
We ask people in general to contact only their own legislators
Right.
and to include their address in their email or text so that the legislator knows it's a constituent.
Yes, I think that's a league advice also. Well, related to this, coming off right now, what legislators should we be contacting about what bills?
So the bill that's going to come up first is the one we're opposing, which is Steve Handy's HB 17. And that one is coming up for a House vote in the next couple of days. So the time is now for asking legislators to oppose that. And none of the others are scheduled yet for committee hearings.
Okay,
So we're going to hold off on any of those. I mean, it's always fine to contact your legislators and tell them what bills you support, but it's most relevant to contact the committee members shortly before the committee hearing and to contact House and Senate shortly before it comes up for a House or Senate vote.
right. And this is coming up for House, so we
Yeah.
should contact our state rep, not our senator.
Right, exactly.
Okay, and so the Climate Utah website is just climateutah.com.
I think it's both .com and .org. We have them both.
Oh, okay, that's easy. That's how to get there.
Right.
Okay, Norma has another question in here. Do you think that redistricting will have a significant effect on the urban-rural divide in the legislature?
I doubt it. The districts, you know, they're mandated to have roughly equal numbers of people in them.
Mhm.
And however they draw them, however they choose to draw them, they start from the outside and work in. And so you're still going to pick up, you know, the right number of rural voters working from the outside. I think we're still going to end up with roughly equal numbers of rural and urban districts. I've been told, and it sounds credible to me, that the redistricting for state and for House and Senate state districts is much more driven by incumbent protection than it is by party. When the legislators have the power to draw the districts themselves, they tend to draw them to protect people who are already in office,
Yes, but
not put two incumbents in the same district and so on.
yeah, but we should have an independent district drawing.
Yeah, it
this
is
time.
yet to be seen how independent that commission will end up being, what will survive out of this legislative session.
Okay, I have confidence in the independent commission. What the legislature does with it after they get the recommendation. is the
Right.
question. That's what you're saying, correct?
Yeah, I mean, they could just eviscerate the whole thing this session. I don't know of any bill to do that. I don't know if you're tracking that closer than I am. But I guess what I'm saying is whether it's by an independent commission or by the legislature, the rural-urban split will probably look about the same.
I don't understand that because the population growth has been in the urban areas. I mean,
Oh, I'm sorry. That is absolutely true.
I just don't see how they can not shift somewhat.
I'm sorry.
based
I
on
don't mean the same as it is now. I mean the same as it would be with legislators drawing the districts or with a commission drawing the districts.
Oh, no,
But
I meant actually.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Sorry.
Urban areas have grown
Mhm.
relative to rural areas, and so they will be strengthened. They will have more districts after the redistricting.
Chris, are you wanting to ask a question? Chris, you looked like you were putting your hand up. No?
Yeah. And I apologize if you touched on this. I jumped in late, but I'm curious, Tom, what's your take on the new governor as far as his agenda, his priorities? Any difference there from the previous ruler?
I mean, he's about what we expected. He's a continuation of the Herbert administration. He's a good guy. He's younger. He gets climate change. There's no denial there, but he is rural and he doesn't want in any way to hurt rural Utah. The Salt Lake Tribune had a really good editorial last week about that his focus should be more clean energy development in rural Utah than protection of the incumbent industries in rural Utah. And I completely agree with that. I think if he gets his way, he'll do both. He will both try to protect coal, oil, and gas, the existing industries, and try to funnel as much clean energy development as possible to those rural areas. I would wish for a stronger climate focus, but it won't be terrible.
Okay.
But we don't have a Utah bill to do, to help mining communities rehabilitate, right?
No, and I would love to see something like that.
Yeah.
Either at the federal or the state level or both. The Reclaim Act does some. It's not nothing for Utah, but it could be a lot more.
Yeah, that's the federal act.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but it isn't passed yet.
No, it passed the House in the last Congress, and unfortunately, it got attached to a party line infrastructure bill, so the Senate never took it up. That's not the way you pass things. Things will pass, or things will get taken up in the Senate, or in the last Congress anyway, when it was a Republican-controlled Senate, when it actually passed with bipartisan support.
Helen.
Tom, what are your thoughts on the kind of importance and effectiveness of their role, the Clean Air Caucus, with Patrice Arndt departing? Where do we see that group going in terms of being at the forefront of introducing legislation that's favorable to our cause?
I think they're going to be great. They're going to continue to be great. They have done a wonderful job being bipartisan right from the start. If anything, they may be more climate focused going forward than they have been in the past. Patrice was surprisingly hostile to not hostile to climate action, but hostile to making that a topic that the Clean Air Caucus would take up, because she really wanted it to be open to clean air friendly Republicans and not scare them away with climate talk. And the current co-chairs of that caucus are more friendly to climate legislation than Patrice was, or more friendly to having the caucus focus on it. So, and I love Patrice. I think she did a fantastic job. I walked the neighborhood for her, in multiple campaigns. But she was a bit of an obstacle to climate.
Helen, you're saying Clean Air Caucus, that is a group of Democrats only in the state house?
No, it's bipartisan.
It is bipartisan.
It's bipartisan. Yeah. And, it seems to be a really effective dialogue because they invite researchers and scientists and community organizations and others to present and try and inform both the language of the legislation that might be introduced as well as kind of inform the decisions that these legislators might have if that type of legislation comes before them. So it shows great promise. It just, will it continue to gain traction going forward with new legislators coming on board? Will they be attracted to that because their constituents are acutely aware of the impact of climate change on Utah?
Ray Ward is one of the co-chairs of that right now on the Republican side. They have equal numbers of Republican and Democratic co-chairs. And he would really like it to be the Climate and Clean Air Caucus.
Good.
So, and I don't know how valid Patrice's concerns were. I mean, maybe this is a bad thing to do in terms of clean air legislation. Maybe there really is opposition. But I tend to think that Ray is right, that we have opened up the topic enough now that it is safe for the caucus to legitimately discuss without scaring people away.
So to discuss climate.
Yes.
So the new name that he would prefer would be Climate and Clean Air, or just Climate?
Yes. Yeah, Climate and Clean Air.
Climate and Clean Air. Okay.
I think it would still always be primarily clean air focused because that's where the agreement really is. But you know, but he would broaden the scope.
Okay, so we can watch for that.
Hmm. I don't know if that will happen. That's probably a topic for after this session.
Okay.
In the interim, is whether they want to go that route.
Okay, we've got time for one more question, I think. Or one more thing that you'd like to say, Tom.
Oh, just, you know, really appreciate everybody's support and help, and organizations like this, grassroots activism is how stuff gets done.
Now, I wanted to mention Bill Gates's new book that's coming out next month. What's the name of that? Something how to avoid a climate disaster, something like that.
I don't remember. You sent it to me, but
Yeah,
I don't have it in front of me right now.
Anyway, I think that will be interesting. I think the after the colon part of the title is innovative new ways so that we can make to avoid the disaster. That'd be a good book to discuss.
Yeah. I tend to be a deployer in the climate space. Sure, there's a few things we still have to figure out, but we know the answers to most of it already. And mostly it's a time question now. How fast can we get all this stuff done?
Right. Yeah. Let's just do it and fast.
So get going on the things we already know how to do, because they're going to take plenty of time already without worrying too much about the things we don't yet know how to do.
So get a few good things happening in the state legislature to send a good message to our federal representatives to make that happen in the United States.
So
Federally, by the way, calls to Blake Moore would
Okay.
be very helpful right now. Just letting him know from friendly constituents that this is a topic you want him to pay attention to.
And meaning climate issues.
Yeah, he's already inclined in that direction, and he'll do it if he feels like there's support in his
Okay.
district.
Good. Chris.
well, I always like to, I've talked to Tom before on the show, and always like to end with this question or so, is that 10 years ago, could you see the state at this situation, in this position, with this attitude and this openness now to talk about climate and clean air, just back 2010 or 2012? So it is encouraging that the arc of where we are is a lot better, obviously a lot better, but maybe even more so than you thought back just 10 years ago.
Oh my goodness. In 2010, the state legislature passed a resolution saying climate change is a hoax.
Perfect.
Right? And called on the EPA to do nothing about it. Yeah, the progress is incredible right now. I want it to be faster, but you know, anytime I feel depressed, it's important to look at how far we actually have come.
It's safe to say, I don't think we're going to go backwards.
Yeah, I don't either.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
All right, you all. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
here. Thank you, Tom, for being with us. This has been very enlightening, and this is recorded. So I'll let you know where you might see it, or see
All right.
somebody else to see it. Okay.
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Thanks, Tom.
Bye.